The wind howled through desolate canyon, biting at every inch of exposed skin. A rider appeared in the distance, his silhouette barely visible against the gathering storm. He urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves cutting through the dirt like thunder in the night. But it wasn't the storm or the rider that held her attention. It was the silence. The kind that presses down on a person, suffocating any thought or action. The kind that happens after the world has shattered. Maggie's eyes flicked over the broken remains of what had once been a modest homestead, now a charred ruin. The smoke still rose from the ashes, curling into the cold air, the remnants of a fire that had consumed everything in its path. Her hands shook as she clutched the reins of her horse, the only thing that had survived the blaze. The pain was fresh, a raw wound in her chest. Her home, her family, all gone in a single night. There was no sound of birds, no wind rustling through the trees. The world felt like it had been swallowed whole, and Maggie was the last thing left. She had been away when the fire started, caught up in the valley for supplies. She should have been home hours ago. Should have been there to stop it, to save them. Her horse shifted beneath her, bringing her back to the present. She didn't know where to go, what to do next. There were whispers in town, rumors of raiders, of enemies, of a score being settled. She had no idea who or why, only that it had happened. The ranch had always been a quiet, peaceful place, far removed from the troubles of the world. Or so she thought. Her gaze returned to the horizon as she urged the horse forward, the reins tight in her grip. A figure on horseback appeared out of the storm, just a shadow at first, but then closer. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man she'd once thought she'd never see again. His name had haunted her dreams for years, and now, there he was. The last man she'd ever expect to find in these parts, especially after what happened all those years ago. His dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of memories she wasn't ready to confront. He pulled his horse to a stop in front of her, the storm howling louder now, as if nature itself were pushing them toward some unspoken truth. "Maggie," he said, his voice low, steady, "I've been looking for you." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. She hadn't seen him in a decade since that terrible day when everything fell apart. And now, here he was, standing before her, a man from her past, offering no explanation, just his presence. The wind tugged at her coat, but it couldn't drown out the tension between them. Her fingers clenched on the reins as she tried to steady herself, but the world seemed to be spinning out of control. She couldn't trust him. Not again. Not after what he had done. And then, just as quickly as he'd appeared, he spoke again, his words cutting through the storm like a blade. "Come home with me." The simple plea hung between them, as cold and sharp as the wind. Maggie's heart skipped, then raced. The wind whistled through the canyon, almost mocking the quiet, loaded moment. He hadn't said much in all the years since their paths had diverged. What had happened between them? What he'd done? It wasn't something she could easily forget, nor forgive. Yet, in his voice now, there was a desperation that gnawed at the edges of her resolve. Could it be real? Could he have changed? She swallowed hard, staring at the man who had once promised to love her, then left her in the dust. He was a stranger now, but his words had the power to tear open wounds she'd buried long ago. Her chest tightened with a mixture of anger, confusion, and something far more dangerous, a memory of the man she'd once thought she'd marry, the man she thought would protect her. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her voice trembling despite herself. His eyes flickered, a hint of guilt passing through them, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a long breath, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because I've made mistakes. And I know what I've lost. You." Maggie wanted to scream at him, demand answers, ask why he hadn't stayed when everything had fallen apart. Why he disappeared when she needed him most. But the words wouldn't come, The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, and for a moment the only sound was the wind clawing at the edges of her coat. "You don't know what it's like, Maggie," he continued, his voice quieter now, almost apologetic. "I had no choice, not back then. You didn't see what they did to me, what they forced me to become." She looked away, the anger rising inside her, hot and bitter. "I wasn't the one who disappeared, Luke. I wasn't the one who walked away from everything we built. You made your choice." The words hit harder than she expected, and she immediately regretted them. She could feel his gaze on her, steady and unyielding. He'd changed, but so had she. She wasn't that girl anymore, the one who had trusted him blindly, the one who had believed in him with all her heart. Luke was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with something she couldn't quite place. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I had to leave, for both our sakes. It wasn't safe. It never was." Maggie wanted to ask him what he meant, what he had left her behind for, but there was no time for those questions now. The wind picked up again, swirling the dust around them in a ghostly dance. She felt as though the past had swallowed the present whole, and the ground beneath her feet was suddenly unstable. Then, without warning, the sound of hooves reached her ears. The distinct rhythm of a rider coming fast, not from the storm, but from the direction of town. Maggie's pulse quickened. "Who's that?" Luke's face tightened. He didn't answer immediately, but his hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle. "Stay here," he muttered, his voice low and urgent. The sound of the hooves grew louder, and Maggie felt the instinctual stirrings of fear. Whoever was coming, they weren't interested in a friendly chat. "Maggie," Luke said again, his tone softened, "if you come with me now, I can keep you safe. We'll figure everything else out later. But right now, you need to come with me, please." The rider appeared silhouetted against the storm. It was too late to turn back now. Whatever was coming, it was already too close. The rider appeared out of the dust and shadow like a ghost, his horse galloping at full speed. Maggie couldn't make out his face in the storm's haze, but the urgency in his approach told her everything she needed to know. Luke's hand tightened on his rifle, his body tensing as though preparing for something much worse than a mere passer-by. "Stay behind me," Luke murmured, his voice a low growl. But Maggie didn't move. She was rooted to the spot, the cold biting at her skin as her heart hammered in her chest. The rider pulled up short, his horse throwing up a cloud of dust as it skidded to a halt. He was a big man, clad in the kind of rough clothing that spoke of long, hard days in the saddle. His face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Maggie didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way he held himself that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The man didn't say a word at first. He just stared at the two of them, his gaze flicking between Maggie and Luke with unsettling calm. Maggie's hand twitched toward her own pistol, though she knew it wouldn't do much good. This man looked like trouble, and the fact that he'd found them out here in the middle of nowhere meant he wasn't alone. "Got a message for you," the rider finally spoke, his voice rough, like gravel scraping across metal. "For both of you." Luke's hand never left the rifle, but his posture shifted slightly, a subtle sign of recognition. Maggie caught it, and her stomach churned. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. The rider leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, as though sharing a secret meant only for them. "The fire wasn't an accident." Maggie froze, her blood going cold in her veins. The words struck her like a bullet. She had already suspected as much, but to hear it spoken aloud, especially by someone who wasn't afraid of her or Luke, it felt like the ground was slipping away from her. "Who sent you?" Luke's voice was low but deadly. The rider didn't flinch. "Does it matter?" He flicked a glance over his shoulder, as if expecting someone else to appear from the darkened horizon. His eyes locked onto Maggie for a moment, almost too knowingly. "You're not safe here. You weren't before, and you sure as hell aren't now. People are coming for you, and I'm just the messenger." Maggie's pulse raced, her mind spinning with questions. Who could have done this? Who could have set that fire, taken everything from her, and left her with nothing but ash? The pieces weren't fitting together, and the fear began to gnaw at her resolve. If this man knew something, then the answers were slipping farther and farther away with each passing second. "Then tell me what you know," Luke growled, stepping slightly in front of her, as if he could shield her from whatever was coming next. The rider laughed, short, bitter. "What I know is this: it's too late. And if you're not careful, your past is going to catch up with you real soon." Before Maggie could react, the sound of distant hooves cut through the stillness, a low rumble that grew louder and closer with each passing second. There was no mistaking it. There were more riders on their way. Luke's eyes narrowed, his hand steady on the rifle now. He turned to Maggie, his voice low, almost a whisper. "We need to move. Now." But Maggie didn't move. She was still processing the rider's words, trying to fit them into the puzzle she'd been holding onto for years. It wasn't just the fire. There was something bigger happening here. Something she didn't understand. The rider, noticing her hesitation, gave a curt nod. "You don't have much time. If you want answers, you better start running." The storm was closing in, the wind howling louder, and somewhere in the distance a new set of hooves could be heard. Closer, faster, as if they knew exactly where they were headed. Maggie's chest tightened. This wasn't just about her ranch anymore. This was something much larger. Something that would drag them all into the dark. Luke's hand was on her arm now, pulling her toward his horse, urging her forward. "Come on," he growled. "We can't stay here." The wind picked up, howling as the riders closed in. Maggie hesitated one last time, her eyes scanning the horizon looking for some sign of salvation. There was none. Just the approaching shadow of a storm, both literal and metaphorical. She took a deep breath and followed Luke, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her shoulders like the storm itself. The storm roared around them as Luke urged his horse forward, guiding it through the growing darkness, the hooves thundering over the earth as they raced away from the danger they couldn't outrun. But even in the chaos, there was an undeniable tension between them, a silence that clung to the air like smoke. Maggie sat behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, the chill of the wind biting at her exposed skin. But it wasn't the cold she could feel most. It was the years that had passed, the years of unanswered questions, of old wounds left to fester. The wind whipped through her hair, but her mind stayed locked in the past. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, the only sounds the distant howls of the storm and the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves. Maggie tried to focus on the landscape around her, the rolling hills of the canyon, the stark silhouettes of dead trees against the sky that seemed to grow darker with each passing minute. But every inch of the ground they covered felt like a journey backward, a journey into memories she had never truly let go. Finally, Luke slowed the horse as they reached a small outcrop of rock, a sheltered spot beneath the jagged cliffs that jutted out of the earth like ancient bones. He dismounted with practiced ease and extended a hand to Maggie, his face set unreadable. She hesitated for only a moment before sliding off the horse, the weight of her decision pressing down on her like the storm itself. He didn't speak as he led her to the shelter of the rocks. The wind howled above them, but the outcrop provided a small reprieve, a place where they could catch their breath, even if the world outside was still spinning. She stood for a moment, just looking at him. He was different. Time had done something to him, something that had carved deep lines into his face, leaving a man she barely recognized, someone whose quiet authority now felt like a mask hiding something darker. But the way he moved, the way he still carried himself, it was the same. The man she once knew was still buried beneath all the years, the betrayals, the scars. Without warning he spoke, his voice low and cautious. "I know you've got questions, Maggie. But right now, we don't have time for them. I need you to trust me. She didn't want to. Not after everything. Not after the fire, after his disappearance. But there was something in his eyes, something raw and honest, that stopped her from turning away. She had spent years thinking she had no answers, but now, standing here with him, she could feel the pull of the past tugging at her once more. I don't know if I can, she said softly, her voice trembling despite herself. She took a step back, shaking her head. You left me, Luke. You left all of us. His gaze darkened, and for a moment, he looked like the man she had once trusted with everything. But then his jaw tightened, and he stepped closer, as if fighting against something he could not control. I never wanted to leave you. I never wanted any of this. But things got worse than I ever expected. I had no choice. Maggie didn't speak for a moment, her mind racing through memories of their past, the laughter, the love, and then the emptiness that had followed. It all felt like a lifetime ago, and yet it was still so raw. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. With slow movements, he untied the string, revealing a worn silver locket, her locket. The one she had lost the night the fire destroyed everything. She hadn't seen it since that day, and now, here it was, in his hands. I kept it, he said softly. I kept it because I knew. One day, I'd come back for you. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. The world around them seemed to go still, the storm momentarily forgotten. Her fingers reached out trembling as she took the locket from his hand. It was cold to the touch, the silver smooth, but it burned in her palm like a brand. She had thought it was lost forever, a symbol of everything that had been taken from her. Why now? She whispered, looking at him with a mix of hope and suspicion. Why are you here now? He met her gaze, his eyes hardening. Because it's not over. It's never been over. You think the fire was the end, Maggie, but it was just the beginning. I don't know who did it, but I know they're coming for us both. And if we don't stick together, we're both dead. His words hung between them, heavier than the storm above. Maggie's hand closed around the locket, and for a moment she could feel the pulse of her old life, the life she had left behind. The woman she had been, the woman she had wanted to be, was still somewhere inside her. But would she be able to trust him again? Could she face whatever was coming and not fall apart? The wind picked up again, rattling the rocks above them, but Luke remained close. His presence was warm, a stark contrast to the cold that surrounded them. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, not yet. He wasn't even asking for her trust. He was just standing there, waiting. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, her mind racing but her heart was starting to settle. She had been alone for so long, carrying the weight of grief and anger, but now there was a flicker of something different. Something that didn't feel like hatred or fear, but the possibility of something new. Something that had the power to heal. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze once more. I don't know what's coming, she said quietly. But I'm not running anymore. Luke's lips twitched, just slightly, as if he had expected her to turn away, to reject him completely. But instead she had chosen to stand beside him, to face whatever was ahead. The storm outside raged on, but in that small moment of shared silence, Maggie felt something shift. Something real. Something they both needed. And for the first time in a long while she felt like she wasn't alone. But just as quickly as the connection formed, the tension returned. Footsteps echoed in the distance. The riders were closing in. Luke didn't hesitate. He moved to his horse, grabbing the reins with a firm hand. Get on. We're not safe here. Maggie nodded, the locket still warm in her hand. The past might not be something they could outrun, but for now they had each other. And that was all she had. As the storm howled, they mounted and rode off into the night, with danger hot on their heels. The moon hung low in the sky, pale and distant, casting a dim light over the rocky trail that wound its way through the canyon. Luke led the way, his face set with grim determination, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the riders that had been tailing them. Maggie rode beside him, her mind a whirl of uncertainty, but she was steady now. The storm had passed, the wind easing, leaving only a heavy, silent stillness in its wake. They had been riding for hours, the horses tired and their progress slow, but there was no turning back. Not now. The fire, the raid, the lies, it was all connected, and the truth was just out of reach. Maggie couldn't let go of the thought that the answers were still out there waiting for her to find them. But now, at least, she had one thing she could trust: Luke's presence beside her, no longer a ghost from her past, but someone she could rely on in the present. They reached a small clearing just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the pale light creeping through the cracks in the canyon walls. Luke pulled his horse to a stop, dismounting with practiced ease. He didn't speak right away, but Maggie could feel his tension. He was waiting for something, watching for something. "What are we waiting for?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the long ride. "The cavalry," he said, looking toward the distant hills. She frowned. "Cavalry?" Luke didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face her, his eyes dark with something she couldn't place. "It's over, Maggie. Whatever happened with the fire, whatever's been chasing us, it ends today." Maggie studied him for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had wanted this, had longed for it, but now that it was here, the finality of it all felt overwhelming. She wanted answers, not just closure, but the truth of what had happened to her family, to her ranch. But she also realized something else. The truth wasn't just about revenge or righting wrongs. It was about understanding who she was now, who they both were. Luke reached out, his hand tentative, unsure. "Maggie," his voice was rough, and for the first time she saw the vulnerability that had been hidden beneath the layers of his hardened exterior. "I didn't come back to bring you into danger. I came back to fix the wrongs I've done. And if I have to face down hell to do that, I will." Her gaze softened and she took a step closer. "You can't fix everything, Luke. But you can try." She looked down at the locket in her hand, the cool silver still warm from her touch. "I'm not asking you to undo the past. I'm asking you to help me make sure we have a future." The sound of hooves interrupted them, sharp and clear, drawing closer. Luke's eyes flashed, and he turned toward the sound, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. Maggie didn't flinch. She was ready. Whatever came, they would face it together. The riders emerged from the fog of dawn, a group of men on horseback, their faces hard and unyielding. At the forefront was a man Maggie recognized immediately, a tall, lean figure with a scar running down his cheek. His name was Reeve, and she knew that face all too well. He had been the one to bring the law down on her family years ago, the one who had started the fire, or so she had believed, the one who had destroyed everything. Luke stepped forward, rifle raised, his stance rigid. "Reeve," he said, his voice steady but cold. "I figured it'd come to this." Reeve's lips curled into a slow smile, his eyes narrowing as he looked from Luke to Maggie. "Well, well, seems the prodigal son has returned, and he brought a little lost lamb with him." Maggie's hand hovered near her pistol, but she didn't draw it. She was tired of running, tired of hiding from men like Reeve. This time there would be no fleeing. "Enough of the games, Reeve," Luke spat, his rifle aimed squarely at the man. "We both know what you did." Reeve chuckled darkly, but there was no humor in it. "I did what I had to do, boy. You just didn't understand it at the time." He motioned to the riders behind him. "Now this here is where the story ends for you both." Maggie's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She had heard enough of his lies, enough of his twisted reasoning. He wasn't going to control her anymore. Luke was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again his voice was like iron. "You took everything from her. And I'm going to make sure you never get the chance to hurt anyone again." There was a long beat of silence, thick with the tension of the moment. Then, without warning, the riders moved. It was fast, too fast, and the air seemed to crackle with the tension before it all erupted into chaos. Gunfire rang out in the clearing, the sound of hooves and shouts filling the air. But Maggie wasn't afraid. She knew what she had to do. Her hand was steady as she drew her pistol, the familiar weight of it giving her strength. She fired once, twice, hitting one of Reeves' men square in the chest. He fell from his horse crumpling to the ground, but Reeve wasn't finished. In that instant Luke moved, his rifle blasting a shot that took down another rider. The remaining men hesitated, unsure of what to do next. But Reeve, still standing, raised his hands in mock surrender. "Is this really how you want it to end?" Reeve called out, his smirk still in place, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "All this over a damn ranch?" Maggie stepped forward, her pistol still aimed at his chest. "It's not about the ranch. It's about everything you took from me. From us." Reeves' face twisted in anger, but it was clear he was losing ground. The men behind him, seeing the tables turn, began to back away, and within moments they scattered into the morning mist. The battle was over. Maggie didn't lower her gun, not yet. But when she finally did, she felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The storm was finally gone. Luke stepped beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his voice low. "It's over, Maggie. It's finally over." She nodded, her throat tight. It wasn't the end she had expected, but it was the one she'd fought for. And so the two of them stood there, together in the early light, the dust of battle settling around them. Behind them, the remnants of the past lay broken, scattered. But in front of them, there was only the open road, the promise of whatever came next. Years later, Maggie would remember that moment. The silence after the storm. The feeling of being whole again, not because of what had been fixed, but because of what they had survived. And in the distance the sun set low over the canyon, casting long shadows across the land. The wind, once fierce, now only whispered softly. The saddle was empty now, waiting for the next rider.